I worked the graveyard shift at a tomato plant nestled between towns in California's Central Valley. Out there, it's pretty much just a few scattered houses, some dairies, and vast open spaces. I used to take smoke breaks while watching Netflix or listening to podcasts in between rounds. There was literally no one around. I spent over 5 years there, and I never saw a soul venture out. Behind the guard shack, there was an open field. One night, as I stepped out for a smoke and was engrossed in something on my phone, I heard voices and laughter coming from behind the shack. I brushed it off, attributing it to the wind or sounds drifting from the dairy down the road. But the laughter persisted, so I decided to investigate. Growing up in what many would consider a tough area and having served in the military, I'm not easily scared. Yet, as I peeked around the corner, I nearly lost my nerve. In the middle of the field were 2 children, a boy and a girl, chatting and giggling. They couldn't have been more than 7 to 10 years old. I couldn't comprehend how they got there or what they were doing. Squinting my eyes, I tried to rationalize what I was seeing. It all unfolded in a matter of seconds, but it felt like an eternity. To my disbelief, they seemed almost translucent, and their clothing appeared outdated, reminiscent of the early 20th or late 19th century. Then, I noticed something chilling. They seemed to have no lower bodies, just fading away from the waist down. Suddenly, they fell silent and turned to face me, as if they sensed my presence. That's when I saw it. Dark, empty voids where their eyes should have been. In a panic, I dropped my cigarette, flooded the area with light, and shut all the blinds in the guard shack, something I'd never done before. I was trembling, overwhelmed by a sense of dread. I muttered a quick prayer and desperately tried to reach my wife, but she was unavailable. It was only around 2:30 to 3 a.m., halfway through my shift, and I couldn't bring myself to continue my rounds until dawn. I spent the rest of the shift trying to distract myself with comedy shows, but the encounter haunted me. I never experienced anything like it before or since that night. I attempted to research similar sightings of children with dark eyes, but each attempt left me feeling as unsettled as I was that night. It took me a while to come to terms with what I witnessed, and even longer to confide in my wife. Eventually, she convinced me to share my story with a couple of the channels I used to listen to, like Ermaker and Bebusta. Every time I pass by that place, I'm reminded of that eerie night. Working the night shift, there was one incident that made me a firm believer in ghosts. Around 5 a.m., my team, consisting of 3 of us, received a fire alarm call from our monitoring center, alerting us to an activated fire alarm in one of the buildings. Both security and the fire department rushed to the scene to investigate. Despite thorough inspections, no signs of fire or suspicious activity were found. The fire captain, perhaps lightening the mood, jokingly suggested that a ghost might have triggered the alarm. Back at base, my team decided to review the CCTV footage to get to the bottom of the mysterious alarm. As we scrutinized the recordings, we witnessed something that sent chills down our spines. In one particular area, the case for the fire panel was pulled down, with the handle moving as if being pulled by an invisible force. In that moment, all 3 of us exchanged bewildered glances and uttered, "What in the actual hell?" That spine-tingling experience left us all convinced that there are indeed ghosts lurking on our site. An abandoned hospital. Well, mostly. There were 2 nurses and 0 to 3 patients each night on the 3rd floor when I began. I had to visit some of the empty floors too, and especially the highest floor was hated by us who had to do rounds in the hospital. The barcode sticker we scanned was placed at one end of the corridor. To get to it, you had to walk past 10 to 15 rooms, which hopefully were empty. Some rooms had their doors open, some closed, and some ajar. Despite the floor not being in use, different doors would be open/closed/ajar than the previous night. Personally, I didn't bother checking each room. I just walked to the end of the corridor as quietly as I could, resisting the temptation to look behind. Then back in the same style to the middle and the safety of the lit stairwell. There was also a sign in the lobby pointing down to the straights, and it said pools. I immediately thought spawning pools. I imagined that if I went there, the pool would probably be empty, but when I turned, I would hear a splash behind me. I never did go down there, and I never saw or heard anything weird, But another guard who trained me said a few guards had reported seeing a woman waving from the 7th floor balcony. The same balcony on which our barcode was placed. Apparently, one had a supervisor drive there, which takes 20 to 25 minutes, and they checked together but found nothing. After a couple of years, even the nurses' operations were shut down, and the building was left empty. For a while, we still had to visit inside, and now the whole building was dark and quiet. Now the building is partially in use again, and slightly less creepy. I want to preface this by saying that to this day, I still don't know if what I experienced was a ghost or not. Back then, I wasn't a security guard, but I performed almost all the duties of one. I worked as a manager at an event center, and part of my responsibility was to lock up and secure the building every day. Looking back on it, I wish we had proper security. It wasn't uncommon for us to encounter the occasional spooky occurrence at this job. Lights flickering, items being out of place. But this was different. It began with a few doors being found unlocked by the opener. Naturally, as the manager, I took the blame and was told that I had missed locking these doors. Then, it started happening more and more frequently, and I was still held responsible. One day, my immediate supervisor found a door unlocked, but I hadn't worked the day before, and he had locked up himself. He decided that everyone should stay in the office at the end of the day so that he and I could personally lock up together. Despite our efforts, the same thing happened again. The next day, I was certain I was going to be fired. However, my boss stood by my side and insisted that something was amiss. He even threatened to quit if they fired me. Thankfully, he saved my job, but we were still perplexed as to what was causing this. Then, one day, we discovered something under the bleachers. A tarp, food wrappers, snacks, and empty bottles arranged as if someone had been sleeping there. We took photos and reported it to our immediate supervisor. However, they still managed to dismiss it. Reflecting on the situation, many of the staff members felt uneasy walking through that area, and some refused to work alone. We never received a definitive answer as to whether it was a ghost or someone living there. Even when we suggested that someone might have been residing there, they quickly brushed it off. I can only come to 3 conclusions. Someone deliberately set out to get me fired, it was a ghost, or there was someone living there. It might not be the most conventional ghost story, but it was certainly unnerving not knowing who or what was behind it all. I worked as a patrol driver for a research and development company, cruising around in a beat-up patrol car within a sprawling industrial complex. While most of my encounters were with ordinary locals, I experienced a few eerie incidents and heard even more chilling tales secondhand. Amidst the relatively new buildings, there stood an old brick structure dating back to the early days of the Industrial Revolution. It bore witness to its fair share of suffering and death in bygone eras. Typically, we had a dedicated interior patrol guard for that building, but when he was occupied, I occasionally found myself responding to alarms within its walls. One night, around 2 in the morning, I was dispatched to investigate a motion sensor alarm in the mill building. After some searching, I located the source, a malfunctioning sensor. But as I made my way out, my flashlight began flickering intermittently. It wasn't a battery issue, yet it kept shutting off every few seconds. I hurriedly exited, convinced I heard footsteps trailing behind me. The interior patrol guard shared numerous spine-chilling stories with me. He had been stationed at the site since the early 2000s and, as far as I know, he's still there to this day. According to him, every now and then, within the confines of that old mill building, he'd hear disembodied voices, witness shadows darting about, and on 2 occasions, he claimed to have seen a man dressed in a dark suit and top hat. This mysterious figure would stand by the windows overlooking the river, unresponsive to attempts at communication. Oddly, he never seemed to budge from his spot. Blink or divert your gaze for a moment, and he vanished without a trace. Whether these accounts are genuine or merely the musings of an old-timer attempting to spook the new recruits, I cannot say. But I can attest that they sent shivers down my spine then, and still do now. I worked 12-hour night shifts at an old library undergoing renovations, a building steeped in history, dating back to the early 1900s. Our site office, nestled in the basement, exuded a cold and dismal aura. One evening, As I arrived early to unwind with a coffee before my shift, a foreman approached me and casually remarked, "Did you know where you're sitting?" They had to extract coffins from the ground before they built the library. From that moment on, my perception of the place shifted drastically. It turned out that the site had once been a convent Catholic school before it was transformed into a library. In the following nights, I began to experience eerie sensations, a pervasive feeling of being watched or followed during my patrols. One particularly unsettling incident occurred after I had completed my rounds. Upon returning to the basement office, I barely had time to settle into my seat when the distinct sound of a window shattering echoed from upstairs. I bolted outside, scouring the perimeter of the building, yet found no sign of intruders. It was well past 3 a.m., and the night was eerily quiet. On subsequent nights, I frequently heard inexplicable sounds of objects crashing to the floor, each instance sending shivers down my spine. Working security at various sites over the years, I had never encountered anything quite like the unsettling atmosphere of that library. It left an indelible mark on me, a chilling reminder of the unseen forces that may linger in the shadows of the past. Though I've moved on from security work, my current night shift at a SAR command center within a federal building presents its own share of eerie encounters. Save for a lone security guard and the occupants of the adjacent command center, the building remains deserted during the nighttime hours. Venturing to the bathroom, located outside the command center, always gives me an unsettling feeling. The handicap stall door consistently remains closed, whether latched or not, contrasting sharply with the slightly ajar doors of the other stalls. Passing by, I often catch sight of a shadow within, as if someone is seated on the toilet, yet the stall always remains empty. Adding to the unsettling atmosphere is the basement, home to the solitary vending machine in the building. With no nearby 24-hour gas stations for refreshments, venturing to the basement becomes a necessity. The minimal lighting, activated by motion sensors, plunges the hallway into darkness until flailing arms prompt illumination. Along this dimly lit corridor, doors with large windows create the illusion of movement in the corner of one's eye, heightening the sense of unease. Yet, the most disconcerting sight is encountering the basement lights already aglow upon arrival, casting an eerie glow over the otherwise deserted area. These eerie occurrences serve as a constant reminder of the eerie solitude that accompanies the night shift.